Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's really a pleasure for us to, gather together here. And here in this session, titled "Inclusive Green Economic Growth for Climate Resilience," is organized by C4ICRAF and also by Bappenas, in this case, Directorate of Food and Agriculture. So for those of you who don't know us yet, of course, Bappenas, everybody knows Bappenas, but then here C4ICRAF is an international research organization of which we use science as a basis for, towards action and also policy. And in this case, we are strive to address 5 global challenges. We work in 92 tropical countries, and the 5 global challenges that we are going to address is deforestation and biodiversity loss, and then climate change, food transformation, inequalities, and also good governance. So here, in this particular event, we are talking about inclusive green economic growth for climate resilience. Why is it important? Because sustainability issues in land use, forestry, and agriculture has been very urgent to be addressed. And why we are here within this side event of the high level forum on multi-stakeholder partnership is because then in this particular issues of land use, forestry, agriculture, there are huge differences in terms of agenda of stakeholders. There are private sectors, there are smallholder farmers, there are government, there are off-takers that all has different agenda, and the power relations are there. There are inequalities, and mostly as well, there are trade-offs between conservation and development, which is, when we do some intensive land use and land use changes, there are some implication or impacts in terms of environmental health. So this sustainability issues multiple stakeholders to sit down together actually to align what is needed for now and for the future generations, so that we are geared towards increased resilience, especially because of the climate change impacts. So with that, there are a lot of policy measures that have been there, actively developed and used with very wide variable different impacts. So this is where we are now as a group, as a team in terms of addressing those sustainability issues. Can we have the presentation, the slides, please? So to save the time, I will not go through all of this. So basically, we have 4 distinguished speakers here. I'm going to introduce a little bit of presentation, and then we are going to look into the development of green growth plan and implementation in particular province in Indonesia, and also the replication of that. So we have here Mas Andre Ekadinata, who is the C4 ICRAF Country Director of Indonesia. And then we have also the pleasure to have Dr. Do Trong Nguyen from Vietnam, who is also going to share the lessons learned from Vietnam in terms of green economic growth planning. And then from that, we will have the pleasure to have Ibu Regina Ariyanti, who is the head of development planning agencies of South Sumatra government. And then last but not least, we'll have the distinguished Dr. Jarod Indiarto, who is the Director of Food and Agriculture of Bappenas. And then hopefully we have some time to to have some question and answer. So with that, I would like to ask Mas Andre to come to the stage and join me here, followed by Dr. Juan. Thank you. And then Ibu Regina. And Pak Jarod, please. Thank you. Thanks a lot. So as the background, as I mentioned before, there are problems actually, sustainability problems, sustainability issues that have been really addressed by many different, at the multiple level, many different actors, from the state actors, from the private sectors, and also from subnational government as well. So we are going to, this particular slide show you there are typology of those sort of policies. There are global policies, those that you already are familiar with is like Paris Agreement, etc., which is legally binding. But there are also some policies that are non-legally binding. And then if you see the role, there are the players can be state actors, can be non-state actors, or a combination between the two of them. Yeah. And in this particular session, we are going to look into this. Sorry, the pointer doesn't cannot show here. So we are going to really focus on the second row. Basically, this is where the state and non-state actors working together and combining their agenda, their aspirations in terms of jurisdictional approach towards inclusive green economic growth for climate resilience. So basically, we are going to look into that particular policy types, while you might be familiar with many other types, like, for example, the one that we look into from time to time is RSPO, which is more into from the non-state actors going into the single sort of commodity. So sorry for the slides there. We don't mean to cancel the fourth point and the fifth point, but there are some issues there with the presentation, with the slide. So with this, we would like to focus on the jurisdictional approach. Basically, maybe some of you are already familiar with what jurisdictional approach is. So basically, JA or jurisdictional approach is what happened? Can you bring back the slides, please? Yeah, so basically JA has been used in a variety of purpose or objectives, and also in terms of who actually are behind that, whether it's state actors, whether it's mostly from non-state actors, etc. And then in the last decade, JA has been increasingly developed, and with the particular purpose to reduce deforestation, degradation, and also unsustainable land use in tropical areas. Particularly, sometimes it's focusing on one or two commodities like oil palm. And then JA operates through parties approach within political or administrative boundaries and applies to parties broadly. So basically, JA sometimes mostly is applied at the provincial level, but sometimes it's also at the district level. In some cases, it also applied at the national level. But for big countries and very diverse countries like Indonesia, basically the national level JA perhaps is not very effective. And then this is the benefit of having applied GA. You can see in the left column. Basically, it's addressing the issues of project-based approach. So sometimes what you see is in a particular areas there are carbon project, but then we see there's a lot of leakage in that particular area. Perhaps carbon emission, greenhouse gas emission can be reduced, but there is leakage to other areas. Yeah, and then there is issue of permanent social safeguard, etc. And then this GA is also addressing the issues of certification, of which we see from time to time that they are, rather than inclusion, they are exclusion, because, for example, smallholder cannot really comply to any sustainability standard or certification. That's why they are excluded from that. Yeah. And then there are always there are some differences or multiple agenda between internal and external parties. So here with GA we can align that. If you see the diagram in the left-hand side, basically this is part of the manuscript or paper by Von Essen and Lamben in 2021. There are huge varieties of GA or jurisdictional approach. According and here they classify the typology into three. You see the differences in colors actually showing differences in terms of focus of intervention. So in the yellow part is where the JA with intervention focus on commodities like JA for oil palm, or it can be multiple commodities like oil palm and cacao. And then the right-hand side, the green zone is the areas for intervention focus on multiple sectors. And then the last one, the blue part, is intervention focus on carbon stock. So this is where we are going to as well structure this session. So from the speakers here, some basically Mas Andre and Juan will talk about the intervention focus on multiple sectors. And Ibu Regina will delve further into intervention focus on commodities. And Pak Jarod will also then follow that up, showing how then JA in terms of starting from focusing on commodities, going broader into the multiple sectors. So with that, I would like to ask Mas Andre to join and present his slides in terms of multiple sector GA that has been applied in South Sumatra. The time is yours, Mas Andre. You need this.
Thank you so much, Ibu Saya. Good afternoon, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Selamat siang, salam sejahtera untuk kita semua, salam sehat untuk Bapak Ibu sekalian. First of all, on behalf of ICRAF Indonesia, C4ICRAF Indonesia, I would like to say that I'm deeply honored to be here to share the stage with all the distinguished speakers, and also to be able to share some of the lessons learned we have to all of you who are attending in this room. And also I would like to send my regard to the audience in the Zoom who are currently joining us from all over the world. And I would like to say that this is really special for session because we are going to hear a lot about the lesson learned and some challenge that we are facing in trying to implementing green growth in Indonesia. So basically within C4ICRAF Indonesia, we believe that when we enter the 21st century, we need to shift our paradigm from the traditional economic to the green economic, which somehow bring forward the issue of not only economic prosperity, but also about social inclusion and environmental sustainability. So the story that I'm going to share with you is going back to 2016, actually, when we start the concept of green growth with the full support of the province of South Sumatra, where at the time and even now, still, the province is still one of the provinces with very rich natural resources, but also grappling with the challenge of deforestation, land degradation, and also climate change. So in relation to Ibu Sonia explanation earlier, this particular presentation will touch about the green growth as part of the jurisdictional approach for multiple sector. So basically, the green growth approach that we are conducted in South Sumatra about 8 years ago is not a technical process, is not only a scientific process, it is actually a very much a collaborative process led by the government of South Sumatra. And we are very proud to be the partner of the government of South Sumatra who are giving the support and most importantly, provide a basic commitment of the province to be able to transform into a sustainable economic entity. So basically the green growth start with 7 steps. The first one, we work together with the provincial government to develop common vision and common dream among stakeholders. Once we have that, we try to conduct data collection, which is all over Indonesia is a big issue because data availability sometimes always be a problem. And then we try to conduct historical analysis, trying to understand what is the historical problem of the landscape by looking at historical data like land use, greenhouse gas emission, biodiversity, and etc. And then together with the stakeholder, we try to develop what we call as business as usual scenario. What will happen to the landscape if there's no intervention of green growth? By doing that, we try to open the mind of the stakeholder about what the worst thing can happen to the land if there's no sustainability action is taken. Based on that, we try to develop together what we call as the green growth scenario and ex-ante analysis, trying to bring some perspective and intervention that can help the landscape to actually become sustainable in the future. After that, we conduct what we call a trade-off analysis, comparing scenario and try to select what is best for South Sumatra. And at the end, we try to develop the roadmap and monitoring evaluation systems so the plan is not remain as a book in yourselves, but it can be mainstream into your formal development planning. Behind the process itself, although it is a very much collaborative process involving multi-stakeholder discussion, etc., but behind that, there is a scientific proven model where we try to analyze step by step what is the consequences of each scenario and how to measure the ex-ante impact of the scenario itself. We begin with the left side of the screen where you see there's a box about land requirement and land distribution, which somehow in the case of other provinces in Indonesia can be translated as the spatial plan and also the target within your medium-term or long-term development plan. That is your land requirement actually. Your land requirement is then translated into planning unit. You divide your requirement into several type of area within your landscape. There is protected area, there is production forest, there is agricultural land, and etc. However, you need to also understand that even though you have allocated that needs, what happened on the ground can be different with your plan. That's why we conduct the land use change model, try to predict what will happen in the future if the development planning or the spatial plan is conducted by the local government. From that, we try to develop or calculate the ecological impact. We calculate the carbon stock. We try to assess the biodiversity impact of the development plan. And also we try to assess the hydrological impact of the scenario itself. Once we have through that, we go to the input-output model, which is an economic model that can reveal interconnection between sectors. And we try to see how and what are the impacts of each sector to other sectors within the same economic landscape. And that cycle continues until we found the best scenario that can be implemented in the landscape. The green growth approach is actually powered by a software called Land Use Planning for Multiple Environmental Service. You will find the publication on your table actually explaining about the software of Lumens and also some of the detailed calculation and scientific proof behind that. And then after that, basically the question remains on how to measure the green growth. How do we know that it is effective? How do we know that it is working and it gives the expected benefit that we want? So actually we come up with several macro indicators that can be classified into 5 different categories. The first one is about sustained economic growth. So the province of South Sumatra can measure what is the GDP, what is their employment rate, and what is their income if they're implementing the green growth planning. Second one is about inclusive and equitable growth. The third one is about social, economic, and environmental resilience. The fourth one is about healthy productive system. And the fifth one is about greenhouse gas emission reduction. Each of the criteria has its own macro indicators. And now this is what is interesting. If we connect to the jurisdictional approach, the GA that Ibu Sonia has mentioned, these are the macro indicator which are not commodity specifics. So it's very much landscape specific. Whatever commodities that you are going to assess within your jurisdictional approach, it can be linked to somehow this landscape approach. And that's the beauty in it. So basically the province can have the macro indicators that can measure what are the impacts of the commodities development within their area, regardless whether it's about oil palm, rubber, cacao, or other strategic commodities. The South Sumatra actually come up with 7 strategies, 7 very much thoughtful steps to conduct green growth. The first one is about land use planning and land allocation. For South Sumatra, it is best for them to allocate the land according to their needs and in the place where it has minimum impact to environment, but give the best impact in terms of economics. Second one is about increased access to the 5 livelihood capitals. And there's also about improved productivity, improved value chain, effective forest and land restoration, and also how to develop incentive mechanism of ecosystem service. However, the beauty of the Green Growth Plan is not on the 7 strategies, but how these strategies is mapped throughout the land. So for South Sumatra, each of the strategies can be found the location and the area, the exact location where the strategy can be implemented, and how and what it takes to implement the area. We call it intervention maps. So basically the 7 strategies that you see earlier can be mapped across the landscape and to be see what are the activities that need to be conducted in each of the landscape within the South Sumatra itself. And at the end, we can also measure the ex-ante impact. What is the impact if the green growth plan intervention activity is conducted in terms of regional GDP and CO2 emission? You can see in the graph that the green growth can provide a very good economic impact, however, while at the same time it reduces the CO2 emission, which is one of the expected outcome. And there's also a lot of indicators which I cannot show you all, but we can see that one of it here. Basically, after South Sumatra, CIFOR-ICRAF Indonesia has replicated the green growth planning approach to several provinces. There's Aceh, Jambi, Papua, Papua Barat, and also the 2 provinces that are currently working on the green growth plan, which is South Sulawesi and East Nusa Tenggara. And also there's also one province in Lamdong in Vietnam where Mr. Hoan will also explain to you later. But the thing that I want to stress here is that although we start with the same framework, same tools, each of the provinces that you see on the screen has their own uniqueness. They start with their vision and they start with their own capacity, which might be different. If you compare between Aceh and Papua, there's a lot of differences. But the thing that I want to stress is that the framework and the method can be used across different type of landscape. Basically, ladies and gentlemen, this is my last slide. I just want to say that the Green Growth Plan is not a technical plan that only be used as a guidance, but is also used to be mainstream into a local formal development plan. And that is one of the most important thing, because if the plan remain as a technical document, if it remain as a technocratic document, it will not go anywhere. So the most important part of the green growth is actually when we try to develop and mainstream the document into local development plan and spatial plan. But Ibu Regina will touch about it more later, so I will not talk it more. So just to sum up all of my presentation, I just want to say that the road to sustainability is a collaborative road, actually. It needs all of our help, and we invite everyone that has interest to join us toward the sustainability road. Thank you, Ibu Sonia.
Let's give an applause to Pak Andre for his excellent presentation. Thank you so much, Mas Andre. So he already alluding how important is the inclusive process and also the integrated process. But on top of that, the informed process that is based on scientific method, on the valid data, that is very important in terms of pushing these sustainability issues at the jurisdictional level. So as Pak Andre mentioned, the approach has been supported by one framework which is called Lumens, land use planning for multiple environmental services. And Mas Andre mentioned that this has also been applied to one particular province in Vietnam, and even broader than compared to the sectors that has been addressed in South Sumatra. So, Dr. Juan, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you, Ibu Sonia. So it's my great honors to be here with all the distinguished guests, Ibu Sonia, Pak Gerald, Ibu Regina, and Pak Andre. With all of you, it's just really a pleasure to be here in Bali. And also, I would like to thank the organizers to invite me and give me a chance to share experience. We applied the green growth framework that Ibu Sonia has already mentioned earlier in one particular province in Vietnam, in Lâm Đồng. Before I start with the Lâm Đồng province, I may need to introduce a little bit about I'm sure, is it okay? All right. So I'll talk a little bit about the Vietnam Green Growth Strategy. So we start the national strategy on green growth in 2012. And the first green growth, we would say the first generation of green growth action plan in that period. So the green growth plan of Vietnam would have three main pillars. Is one on the green production, try to reduce the use of materials and natural resource in production. The second aim is to reduce the intensity of greenhouse gas emission. It is a very strong focus on the energy sector. So we try to aim at reducing the 10% to 20% of emission from the energy sector compared to the business as usual scenarios. And the third pillar is about promoting the green lifestyle. Basically, that national plan focus on either the growth aspect or climate mitigation. It focus more on the energy sector, but lack of the adequate attention to the land use sector and other sectors. And also it doesn't have much dimension of inclusive green growth, which is including the marginalized stakeholders, also including the aspect of biodiversity conservation or ecosystem services. Just a quick comparison of the pillars of green economy by FAO in 2010 and the Vietnam Green Growth Strategy. You can see that we focus very much on the production and use of renewable energy and also energy efficiency, while we are lack of other dimension of green growth. So that's why where the government of Lâm Đồng turns to C4 ICRAF Vietnam at that time and asks us for do a more innovative green growth action plan, and we turn to the team of Ibu Sonia asking for help. The use of Lumens, as Pa Andre talked before, to apply it to Lâm Đồng province. Basically, we try to integrate the ecosystem services into the action plan. We also try to integrate the social dimension into the action plan that include the food security, the land tenure, the right, the gender. We may try to be more the plan more explicit to the poor and for ethnic minorities programs. We also promote green lifestyle and green jobs. And as Ibu Sonia has already mentioned, we cover 6 sectors, which is a bit broader than the one that C4 ICRAF done in South Sumatra. It's agriculture, forestry, tourism, transportation, water resource management, and energies. And we also try to simulate all of the impacts of the Green Growth Action Plan into the economic, the GRDP of the province as a downstream industry. I will skip this one. And just to give you a bit of background on Lâm Đồng province, the Lâm Đồng province is in the central highlands of Vietnam. It is one of the powerhouse in terms of coffee production. So you know that it's similar to the oil palm in Indonesia. Coffee is the, it's a very important commodity for Vietnam. We are the second biggest coffee exporters in the world. And also Lâm Đồng has a lot of problem coming from coffee production and tourism in the province. Water shortage is one of the problem because coffee is a thirsty species. It requires a lot of water for irrigation. And tourism also causes a lot of negative impacts on the environment aspect. So we try to develop a 9 green growth strategies for Lâm Đồng province, as you can see, promoting the use of renewable energies, try to reduce and control emission from all sectors, including the land use sectors, reducing the waste, promoting climate smart and sustainable land use system, including the agroforestry, conserving water, natural resource, develop green and sustainable tourism, enhancing product quality of main commodities and promoting green lifestyle. And especially we try to create the enabling condition for transitioning towards a green economy. I will likely to re-mention the sectors we cover here: energy, agriculture, forest, tourism, water processing, and transportation. Waste processing and transportation. And as a result, we find that if all the Green Growth Action Plan will be put into place, then we will contribute to about 66,000 billions to the provincial GRDP, which about to be equal to 73% of the total GRDP of the province by 2030, which is an impressive figures. And I think it will be a lot of, people will see this is quite an impressive, but just to mention that it is in the case of all the strategy and intervention will be implemented. We also have a summary of impact indicators. I think Park Andre have already mentioned in his slides those indicators, but we have some more detailed indicators, which is about 22 indicators. And we say that there are a lot of, positive indicator in terms of economic growth, in terms of reducing emission, and also in terms of the use of water for agriculture. So there is a lot of, green signals for the transition to the Green Growth Action Plan. Coming to the end of my presentation is I would like to highlight the new perspective that the study we have in Lâm Đồng has already contributing to the Vietnam Green Growth Action Plan. First, we do have the integration of the green agriculture practices into the plan. All of the land base and tourism sectors has included, and we create kind of a jurisdictional approach to the Green Growth Action Plan, because this is new in Vietnam, because the Green Growth Action Plan at the national level and in other provinces, they are focused on 1 or 2 sectors. They are not covering the whole jurisdiction as we did in Lâm Đồng, which is kind of the new approach. Second, the third difference here is the mainstreaming of ecosystems services into the Green Growth Action Plan, which is new, because basically before in the Green Growth Action Plan of Vietnam, we didn't mention the forest cover, we didn't mention the sustainable agriculture practices. And lastly is the monitoring and evaluation. The list of indicators that Park Andre has mentioned before is one of the things that impressed the governors of Lâm Đồng the most, because this is the very powerful tools for them to monitor and to enforce the implementation of the Green Growth Action Plan, unless like the other plan which have no indicators or very loosely defined indicators. And in 2020, we did these practices in 2018 and 2019 for Lâm Đồng. And in 2021, the Vietnam Green Growth Action Plan has been, the second generation of the plan has been issued. And we will see that the new things has been included. We see the agricultural practices, we see the forest cover, we also see other sectors, and we also see the human development index, and we see the access of population to the water and to also the access the green transportation, which as a new dimension has not been included in the Green Growth Action Plan before. So we cannot claim all 100% of this change is due to what we've done in Lâm Đồng, but we believe that we have positively influenced the process of transformation. So that is the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Juan. Please give Juan a round of applause. You can see that he used to be a Korea boy band, but now he moves to Vietnam. So thank you, Juan. So Juan has been sharing how science to policy process has been creating some positive impacts, at least in one province in Vietnam, and it breaks the silo among sectors because the Green Growth Action Plan is actually going through land use sector, forestry, agriculture, but also going to tourism, transportation, energy sector, and also water. I think this is a very nice exemplary case for jurisdictional approach. Thank you very much, Juan. Now we move to going deeper, diving from South Sumatra provincial level master plan, which is multiple sectors, going into the single commodity jurisdictional approach, in this case on oil palm. So Ibu Regina is going to share with us the process and the lessons learned from South Sumatra. The floor is yours.
Yeah. Thank you, Bu Sonia. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I want to talk about the Towards Sustainable Oil Palm from Green Growth Strategy into Action. South Sumatra, we have the Green Growth Plan and formalized by Governor Decree on mainstream into the province long-term development plan and spatial plan. Then the Green Growth Roadmap for Oil Palm has been used as a basis to develop the Provincial Action Plan Sustainable Oil Palms. This demonstrates our commitment. This is a very interested about the commitment multi-stakeholder to translating strategic plan into concrete action by integrating green growth principle into our core development and spatial planning framework. We are ensuring that sustainability is the heart of the decision making. The Provincial Action Plan for Sustainable Oil Palm is a testament to our focus on a specific commodity, recognizing the significant role of oil palm in our economy and its potential impact on the environment. This action plan outlines clear steps to promote sustainable oil palm practices and addressing issues such as deforestation, peatland conversion, and social conflict. South Sumatra Province is a major player in the oil palm industry, ranking 5th nationally and 3rd of Sumatra Island in terms of oil palm plantation cover. The total area dedicated to oil palm cultivation spans on an impressive 1.4 million hectares, of which the larger area in Musi Banyuasin Regency, covering an area 456,000 hectares. And the Banyuasin about the 325,000 hectares. Our commitment to sustainable palm oil management to deeply ingrained in our provincial policy and plan. The provincial medium-term development plan, the plantation service strategic plan, and green growth master plan all emphasize the importance of sustainable practices in the oil palm sector. We recognize that the sustainable management of oil palm is not just an environmental imperative, but also an economic necessity. It ensures the long-term viability of the industry, protect our natural resources, and support the livelihood to control community-dependent oil palm. The map illustration about the oil palm plantation and the spatial plan of South Sumatra. Most the oil palm plantation in South Sumatra are allocated for tree crop plantation, although there are some areas that are located inside forest and protection zone. In the blue color, this is about the plantation area. We are actively working to address this issue through stricter enforcement of spatial planning regulation, promoting sustainable land use practices, and encouraging the rehabilitation and degrade area. Our goals is to ensure the oil palm expansion occur in a responsible and sustainable manner, minimizing its impact on forest and critical ecosystem. This map reveals a concern overlap between oil palm plantation and area prone to forest and pit fire. In the red color, this is overlap between oil palm plantation and the forest. This underscores the urgent need to address the issue of fire prevention and control in the oil palm sector. We are implementing a range of measures to mitigate fire risk, including promoting zero burning practices, enhancing fire monitoring and early warning system, and strengthening community-based fire management initiative. We are also working with companies to ensure the adhere to responsible fire management practices. The data show that a significant portion, 22% of oil palm cover in South Sumatra is located on peatland, primarily in area designed for other uses and partly in permanent production forests. This raises concern about the potential impact of oil palm cultivation on peatland ecosystem, which are crucial for carbon storage and biodiversity conservation. We are committed to protection and restoration peatland in South Sumatra. This includes enforcing regulation and peatland conversion, promoting sustainable peatland management practices, and supporting peatland restoration efforts. We are also exploring innovative approach to culture, which allow for sustainable agriculture, production, and peatland. Through consultation with all stakeholders in the province, we determine a key issue in the oil palm sector in South Sumatra. And the one, land clearing and land preparation with zero burning, promoting zero burning practices to reduce fire risk and air pollution. Availability to high quality and certified seedling, ensuring access to affordable and certified oil palm seedling for improved productivity and sustainability. Governance and agricultural practices, strengthening governance and promoting sustainable agricultural practices through ISPO certification. For extensification in forest zone and pit ecosystem, addressing the issue of oil palm expansion into a forest area and peatland, which can lead to land dispute and environmental degradation. 5. Land tenure conflict. Resolving land dispute related to oil palm plantation through effective conflict resolution mechanism. And 6. Downstream processing industry. Ensuring fair pricing and transparent practices in the palm oil supply chain, particularly for smallholder farmer. 7. Replanting costs, provided financial support to incentive to smallholder farmer for replanting aging all palm trees. And 8. Women empowerment in oil palm plantation, increasing the involvement of women in training, decision making, and leadership role within the oil palm sector. This issue represent complex challenge that require a multi-phase approach. We are working with various stakeholders, including government agency, private company, civil society organization, and local community to address this issue and promote to a more sustainable and inclusive oil palm sector. The South Sumatra Green Economic Growth Master Plan provides strategic guidance for sustainable oil palm development. It outlines appropriate land allocation for expansion and value-added development strategies to boost regional income from the palm oil sector. A key strategy is sustainable land use and allocation, balancing need with land availability. The plan provides special explicit intervention location, recommending specific intervention and their ideal location. Intervention 1, 2, 3, 4, and 8 are relevant to provide input for sustainable management of oil palm within oil palm plantation. The oil palm sustainable strategy of South Sumatra for 2022 to 2024 outline a comprehensive action plan to address the key challenges in the oil palm sector. The strategy focuses on 5 key areas. 1, strengthening data, coordination, and infrastructure, improving data collection and analysis, enhancing coordination among stakeholders, and upgrading infrastructure to support sustainable oil palm production. And 2, increasing to capacity and capability grower, providing training and support to farmers on good agricultural practices, facilitating replanting effort, strengthening farmer institutions, and offering extension services. 3, environmental management and monitoring, mitigation the threat of forest and land fires, promoting sustainable waste management practices, and enhancing environmental monitoring. And 4, plantation governance and dispute handling, ensuring companies fulfill their obligation to support community oil palm plantation, resolving land dispute, and addressing issues related to oil palm cultivation in forest area and peat ecosystem. And 5, accelerating ISPO certification and increasing market access, promoting ISPO certification among growers and facilitating access to market for sustainable palm oil product. The South Sumatra's sustainable the South Sumatra is sustainable palm oil requires funding from various sources. Not just the regional government. We are actively exploring innovative funding mechanism to ensure effective implementation. Potential funding source include national and regional budget, corporate social responsibility, incentive and disincentive scheme through TAPE and TAKE, that is provincial and regency ecological fiscal transfer. Funding from the private and public sector, performance reward incentive scheme, dan financing from the banking sector. Finally, I would like to state that the Green Growth Plan for South Sumatra, with its focus on sustainable oil palm development, represent a crucial step towards a greener and prosperous future for the province by adopting a jurisdictional approach. We are ensuring that the oil palm sector contribute positively to economic growth, social well-being, and environmental protection. The success of the endeavor hinges on the active participation and collaboration all stakeholders, the government, private sector, civil society, and local community must work together to implement the action plan, address the key challenges, and seize the opportunity presented by sustainable oil palm production. The Green Growth Plan is not just a policy document, it is a shared vision for a sustainable future. By working together, we can ensure that South Sumatra oil palm sector thrives in harmony with its natural environmental and contribute to the well-being of its people for generations to come. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bu Regina. Round of applause for Bu Regina. Thank you. So for those of you who might not know South Sumatra very well, especially for participants online, South Sumatra basically in 2015-2016, during that high El Nino season, was the #1 province for the forest and land fire. But then the commitment of the South Sumatra provincial government towards green growth and how they embrace multiple stakeholders basically have turned the table from a very prone climate-related hazards like fire into province that is greener, and as Bu Regina mentioned, the implementation towards one particular commodity which is quite significantly produced in the province at the province level, including in the peatland area. This has been showing some positive impact through the commitment towards multiple stakeholder process and also the incentives through the financing action plan, etc. So thank you so much, Bu Regina. Now we are approaching the peak of the session. Pak Jarod is from the national level entry point, looking into how this country, basically through the approach to the pathway towards sustainable jurisdiction, how actually this can be achieved. Pak Jarod is going to take us through this journey. Yeah, the floor is yours, Pak.
Thank you, terima kasih Bu Sonia. Good afternoon for all of us. I'm very honored to be co-organizing and also to be invited this event. Let me start with some backgrounds probably. As we know that our world today is grappling with, for example, triple planetary crisis. We have faced climate change issues, loss of biodiversity, and also pollution. And those are interconnected each other. And as a big sector in Indonesia, food and agriculture sector not only highly impacted by those crises, but also these sectors contribute to the crisis. Probably I do not go deeply to some numbers that I believe that you all already know. And in handling and also responding to crisis, Indonesia is politically committed to global society on sustainable development. For example, we have committed to implement and achieve the SDGs by 2030. Also, the government have committed to, for example, reduce the greenhouse emission within the framework of UNFCCC. And also in 2021, the government commit to implement the food system transformation. As you know that food system, agri-food system is contributing significantly to the whole issues of development. And the last thing of commitment is on biodiversity. So the government of Indonesia is committed to all of those global initiatives. And responding to that global commitment, the government is always put the sustainability as one of the national planning priorities. And to continue the policy, we integrate this issue into our national development planning, whether it is long-term development planning that is already launched as a law last week by the it is already agreed by the legislative body, and also in our midterm development planning. As you can see in the slide that, for example, we put a green economy, a circular economy in our long-term development planning. It is the way the government would like to carry it out, also to continue this policy direction, go through the different administration period. And this policy direction is realized into some concrete initiatives. As you can see, and also probably some of you followed the initiative, we have a low carbon development initiative, for example, for Indonesia. The government launched last month on roadmap of managing the food loss and waste as a part of a circular economy. And also just launch is on our biodiversity roadmap and also action plan. So those are the real example how the government make the policy directive on sustainable development to be in concrete actions. Actually, we have very strong legal basis for the government and also for all stakeholders to carry out the sustainability. We can see in the context of food and agriculture, we have already the law of a plantation, food crops. We have also a law on sustainable farming system, and many regulation that is already putting into account the need of a sustainability. So we have that kind of a strong regulation to always carry it out and also to exercise the sustainability in our development for all aspects of development. Going in the context of Indonesia and also in the food and agricultural sector, as you know that we are the largest archipelagic country, And also Indonesia is a decentralized country, meaning that almost all of development authorities are decentralized to the provincial and also a district level, even to the village government. So in that context, localizing the sustainability into lower administrative boundaries and also the administration is very important, because most of authorities of our development aspect are already decentralized. And we can see, for example, how important the agricultural sector. For example, if we look at the agricultural land area, we have almost 90 million hectares of agricultural land area. Paddy field, we have more than 7.4 million hectares. So if we, and also palm oil, we still have different numbers. How million hectares of our palm oil. Some says that it may be 14 million hectares. Some said it is more than 16 million hectares. And palm oil plantation, there are around 25 provinces and also more than 200 districts. So in regard in that fact, if we could develop and building the sustainability in food and agriculture sectors, meaning that we can contribute significantly to the sustainability of Indonesia and also for other sectors. I will skip this one because it is already well explained by Ibu Sonia, and also there are some examples of a implementation of sustainable jurisdiction by other countries, including Vietnam for sure. In Indonesia, coordinated by Bappenas, we developed this platform and also indicators since 2018, and those are the journey that we follow. And as mentioned by Pak Andri and also other previous speakers, the multi-stakeholder participation is very important to always to be involved in all process. So far, the Indonesia Sustainable Jurisdiction Indicator consists of 23 indicators grouped into 4 pillars, namely pillars on economy, environment, social, and also governance. And if you can look at the more detailed indicators, the indicators we are trying to capture the indicators to represent the governance of a jurisdiction boundary. For example, we have the indicator to measure whether the district or provincial government is having the resolution conflict, for example. So we are trying to discuss and also develop to represent the sustainable governance at local level. And we build a dashboard covering in this example is still based on palm oil, so it is one of the category that is already explained by Bu Sonia. So it is commodity based jurisdiction. The yellow one, and it covers all of a provinces and also district where the palm oil is located, and the public can show the performance of all indicators, and also it is possible to the public to look at the relative how can I say, relative position of each district compared to other district, for example. So those are the mock-up of the dashboard, and it is still in the process of completing and also developing. It is not launched yet because in the last slide I will show some challenges that we still face. This will be our last slide, and as some of the lesson learned is that once again, multi-stakeholder process is very important to be maintained and also to be inclusive, because sustainable is not only one part or one group of a business. It must be our business for all of the stakeholders. And based off our experience, dissemination, socialization, and also outreach is also important to gather the attention and also participation for all of us, because sometimes the understanding common understanding need to be built. If for example, jurisdiction approach is a bit new concept, so we need to disseminate and also to communicate with all stakeholders. There are some challenges that still we face so far. One is on a data, as mentioned by Pak Andre. Another is that we realize that all stakeholders, we have different interests, and it is, I do not say that it is not possible, but we need we need time to come up with the common understanding and also a common direction. Multi-stakeholder platform must be localized, and I'm very happy that South Sumatra province they have already this kind of a local multi-stakeholder platform, and I think it should be also translated into district level, probably Bu Rekikina, so that we can localize the sustainability action. And the last one is that we need to translate the jurisdictional approach into sectoral and spatial planning, because the real action is done by each technical ministries and also each local, how can we say, local UPTD. What is UPTD in English? Like a local technical unit. So if it is not translated into sectoral and spatial planning, we will face an issue how sustainable can be done into real activities. With that, thank you, and I stop my presentation.
Thank you very much, Pak Jarod. This is really, a reminder to us that, first, the first point that Pak Jarod highlighted was that Indonesia is a very diverse country and it is decentralized. So there's a polycentric government, of which then subnational government is very important. And then secondly, Pak Jarod has been mentioning about the sustainable jurisdictional indicators, which is still a work in progress as well. And as Pak Jarod mentioned, this SJI needs to be integrated into spatial and sectoral plans. And then the third one that Pak Jarod highlighted is that dissemination, socialization is very important because, I think what we face here is a very complex sort of system. There are vertical integration that is needed, vertical communication and outreach from national to subnational, but also within the subnational, there should be some horizontal integration as well. So with that, I think the speakers has been really provided us a rich sort of background information, lessons learned, experience from different level, from different countries. So I think we are lucky to have them here. So perhaps before we go to a discussion and question and answer, I just would like to conclude a little bit about the challenges and the opportunities we have with regard to green growth within jurisdictional approach. So actually with JA or jurisdictional approach, there are several types of intervention. I mentioned before about whether it's commodities as a focus of intervention, whether it's multiple sectors, whether it's carbon stock. But this also, this particular article also develop a typology looking at jurisdictional approach based on who actually who actually are the initiators, whether the initiators is from external actors. In this regards, the example is GHG emission reduction within climate change mitigation that actually has a source of finance from external. For example, for East Kalimantan, for example, there are multi-donor money, including Norway, who promise to provide some incentive if some jurisdictions is able to show the performance regarding reducing emission. There are some challenges with that. We have witnessed that there is very slow realization of that. And sometimes there is a lack of clarity of how actually to measure the performance. And then also because of that, there are reluctance as well from the national government in terms of embracing domestic fiscal incentives linked to sustainability. So that is one challenge, one set of challenges when the initiator is from the external actors. And then when the implementation is within jurisdictions, like for example, the case of South Sumatra, where at that time the governor actually is the one who has the strongest commitment to change, the pathway from being, the number one in terms of forest and land fire into a province that is more green in terms of producing their economy. The difficulty with this is that when there is political transitions, the commitment might differ. Fortunately, in the South Sumatra case, the commitment remains, but it's not always the case. So that can be a challenge. And also when with multi-stakeholder platform or multi-stakeholder group, sometimes the establishment takes a long time because there's a lack of trust, among stakeholder groups, because they have different agenda, as Pak Jarod mentioned. And then there are still tendencies. This is general, not only for Indonesia or Vietnam or some other developing countries, but there are always tendency to focus on development objectives at the expenses of environmental objectives. As I mentioned before, the trade-offs between economic and environment sometimes, is there, and we need to minimize that. And then lack of capacity, lack of data, as the previous speaker mentioned, has been quite important and urgently to be addressed. And then also for the last types, when we talk about jurisdictional approach at the broader level, like for the country of Indonesia, for example, the heterogeneity is, quite rich. That is very difficult to basically to look for or combining very different interests of stakeholders and also from different jurisdiction as well. So, but that is being said, there are a lot of opportunities that we can see from jurisdictional approach. The first one, because of the inclusive process, we can avoid marginalization of particular groups. And then because of, this jurisdictional approach is basically covering an administrative boundary, then the monitoring and enforcement can be led easily by the government. Yeah. And then secondly, the policies and practice reach all actors so that the bias actually can be reduced, so that the bias toward, for example, a particular stakeholder group that can comply, this can be actually organized or led well by the government at whatever level it is. It can be district level, can be jurisdictional approach, can be district, can be provincial. And then the third one is that because of the agglomeration, like Bu Regina and Pak Jarod mentioned about oil palm, but then because, if we are talking about agglomeration of other sectors as well, perhaps the cost of monitoring, the cost of evaluating, and the cost of developing infrastructure can be reduced. Yeah. And then we mentioned about diversity, so there is no size fits all. Basically, we hope that with this decentralized sort of governance, every jurisdiction can actually look into their local context, their specific local context, and can develop their development and spatial plan based on that. Yeah, and then the sixth one that we put here into highlight is that smallholder farmers, indigenous population, local population, local communities should be there as part of the broader multi-stakeholder group and discussion, so that they as the SDG said, there's no one left behind. Yeah. Last but not least, then the seventh one is regarding the indicators of sustainable jurisdiction, like what Pak Jarod mentioned. We think that there are important actually in the context of jurisdictional approach, and there should be two levels of indicators. One could be the macro indicators like Pak Andre mentioned, that goes across social, economic, environment, and perhaps the governance part. And the second level could be a specific to single or multiple commodities. Yeah, that can be like integrating what Ibu Regina has mentioned. That is more focused on oil palm. That can be a second level of indicators. So together as a jurisdiction, which can be district or provincial, we can have a comprehensive set of indicators that can basically illustrate whether one particular jurisdiction is sustainable or not. With that, actually we can now open some questions and answer session from the participants here, and also for the participants who are joining online. So with this, I would like to invite you, if you have some comments and questions. Let's take three from the first round. We have one here. Ibu, maybe you can say who you are and from which institution you are.
Yeah.
Thank you. My name is Tika from Sustainable District Association or Lingkar Temu Kabupaten Lestari. So that is very interesting session because it's really connected with what we are trying to do in our district member. I have two questions, but the first question is like I think for the C4E team about the research that and also the green growth development that already happened in several province. My question is about the impact after the province established the green growth development planning. So how is the trickle down processes into the district level? So I think that is it's very important for us, especially in the South Sumatra. How is our district member in Musi Banyuasin can also connect it, something like that. This is the first question. The second one, this is very interesting when Pak Jarod mentioning about sustainable jurisdiction indicator because like we have many discussion to discuss about this, but it's really interesting will be with the green growth development because it's already connected with the indicator and etc. So my question is like in the future, how is the connectivity? Is there any planning to has the alignment between the green growth development with the sustainable jurisdiction indicator? So yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Ibu. If there is no other questions or comments, we can, or later on we can go there, but maybe with this first question, it should go to Mas Andre, and also then perhaps if Ibu Regina would like to jump in a little bit about how the connection between province to district, and then the second question will be Pak Jarod, how the connectivity between SJI and the green growth. Please, Mas Andre.
Thank you, Ibu Sonia. Thank you, Ibu Tika from LTKL. First of all, actually, when we develop the green growth planning, one of the planning unit that we are using is the district boundary. So it's actually quite easy for each or any district in South Sumatra to take part of the green growth and use that as part of their green growth plan. For example, in Musi Banyuasin, actually they are coming up with the mini green growth plan of their own, which actually taking part of the overall provincial green growth and use that for their own planning at the district level. In other case, the district doesn't use that completely, but take part on for example, the peat ecosystem to actually coming up with peat protection and management plan. And other type of engagement, which not only repeating the same framework or method, it can be taking one part of the planning document, but also can use the method or the data itself and then coming up with different product of planning. But the underlying principle remain that it is always been a process of multi-stakeholder involvement, which also involve technical process of modeling, business as usual scenario, and also the green growth or sustainable scenario. I think that's from me. Bu Regina, you want to add?
Ya, baik. Terima kasih Bu Tika. Mungkin saya pakai bahasa Indonesia saja ya untuk menjelaskannya. Jadi memang proses planning bagaimana bisa dari provinsi ke kabupaten bahkan implementednya di lokasi ya, lokus. Nah ini memang kita lakukan bersama kabupaten kota untuk proses ini dan implementednya jelas untuk di dalam green growth itu sudah ada lokus-lokus tertentu sehingga proses turunan dari provinsi ke kabupaten itu clear. Dan ini juga sebagai pedoman di dalam proyek-proyek yang dilakukan oleh partner. Misalnya kita kemarin dengan ZSL untuk satu lokus, kita pilih satu lokus KHG, di mana di situ ada kolaborasi antar sektor untuk melihat bagaimana sustainnya. Nah, di sini yang paling penting adalah seperti kasus yang di Musi Banyuasin, bagaimana kolaborasi antara private pemilik kebun, kemudian ada juga swasta yang direstorasi. Nah ini kepentingan penggunaan air. Dan ini tidak mudah karena kita harus menggunakan suatu sistem hidrologi sehingga kita buka data bareng-bareng untuk proses penyusunan. Ini yang kolaborasi antara private governance and the local ini. Jadi memang proses green growth ini juga sudah implemented locally ya sampai di situ. Mungkin itu Bu Sanya.
Terima kasih Bu Regina. For participants online, perhaps I just would like to translate a little bit what Ibu Regina has been saying. It's basically because the intervention is spatially explicit. It's not very difficult actually to pick it up to the lower jurisdiction, in this case district level, which has different sets of multiple stakeholders and therefore needs different multi-stakeholder groups. Yeah, Pak Jarod, please.
Yeah, thank you, Bu Tika, for the question. I think the connection between jurisdiction approach, sustainable jurisdiction approach, and green economy is very close, since we know that if we could develop the sustainable activities, mean that green jobs will be developed there, and also sustainable economic activity in the local level will also be developed in the local levels. So then the sustainable jurisdiction will lead to a green growth that we already put in the development planning. I think those kind of a interconnection and also a relationship could be explored. Again, that it must be regulated at local level, because we know that we are so diverse. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pak Jarod. Thank you, Ibu Tika. I think there is no hand here, and we only have, a little bit. Can be very quick, yeah, Pak. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, let me introduce myself. My name is Randa. I'm from Roll Foundation Bali. So I have a question about, because my organization is focused on how to educate people about waste management. So I'm sure that I listen some of the speakers mention about the waste productions and how the solid waste being play a role of the green roads. So my question should be how the waste management play their role to reach the goal of the green growth. Yeah, thank you.
To whom? Maybe, yes, please. Yeah. Thanks, Wan.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. Very quickly, when we developed the green growth in Lâm Đồng province in Vietnam, there's a special concern about the waste management, partly because of the ecotourism activities in the province, and secondly about the use of they call it the greenhouse in Lâm Đồng province to cover. They normally cover the land with the loss of plastic to prevent the damage of the rains to the vegetables and flowers. And then what we did is to understand the business as usual plan for waste management of the province. We try to analyze the use of those materials and the way they handle waste. After that, we try to provide some strategy for reducing the waste from the province, and encourage people to reuse some materials and recycle materials in the province. And after that, we do all of the calculation and try to develop scenarios where we connected with other scenarios in agricultures, in tourisms, and included in our analysis to have some quantified indicators on how much waste to be produced by each sectors, how the reduce and reuse of the waste, including the solid waste and waste from agricultural sectors. There's a lot of cultivation and livestock raising there, and we use the livestock manure to produce energies, for example. All of those indicators will be quantified, and we include it into the emission other province, and also the quantified targets of solids and wastewater. I hope that answers your
Thank you
question.
very much, Juan. Unfortunately, time is up. I would like to remind you to invite you as well that the publication on the table is available for you to take home. And also we have several questions from online participants, but I would like to apologize that we don't have time to address that. But please, if you like, just send an email to us in C4ICRAF, and we will pass the questions to the speakers here and get back to you. We promise that. Please send us email. So with that, I would like to close the session. Sorry. Oh, a
Picture
photo.
with the
So a
speakers,
picture,
please.
Okay, so
All of you stand up.
a picture session. So we invite all the participants or not?
Only the speakers.
Only the speakers. So thank you very much, all participants. I hope there are things that you can take as a take-home messages. Thank you.